In 1978, deep within the heart of Fort Meade, Maryland, a classified unit began conducting psychic experiments under the codename Project Stargate. This was no fringe science experiment. It was CIA-funded and Army-backed. The mission? Develop and train military-grade psychics who could spy on the Soviets with their minds. Sounds insane, right? Well, it wasn't. It was real. Official declassified documents from the CIA confirmed that for over 2 decades, the U.S. government poured millions into remote viewing, mind projection, and what they called anomalous cognition. And they weren't just guessing, they had results. But before we go deeper, here's the twist. Some of these psychics claim to see things no one expected, things that weren't even on this planet. Welcome to Project Stargate. It all started with Ingo Swann, an artist and psychic who stunned researchers by sketching Jupiter's rings years before NASA confirmed they existed, and Pat Price, a former police commissioner, drew detailed Soviet missile silos he'd never seen, later confirmed by intelligence. What spooked the CIA wasn't just the success of these remote viewers, it was the Soviets. In the 1970s, intelligence reports indicated that the USSR was dumping millions into psychotronic research. KGB officers were allegedly training psychic spies to kill goats with their minds, influence American diplomats, and even alter the outcome of space missions. US brass panicked, not because they believed it all, but because they couldn't risk it being true. Enter Army Intelligence. A group of hand-picked soldiers were sent to undergo psychic training, among them Joseph McMonigal. His code name? Remote Viewer Number 01. He'd go on to spy on Iran, Libya, and even Mars. In 1984, McMonigal was handed an envelope, sealed. Inside was a set of coordinates and a time, 1 million years BC. He lay down, entered a meditative state, and began to describe an alien landscape. Pyramids, tall structures, giant beings. Very tall, thin, they're dying, he said. He claimed they were looking for a way to survive. Some had left, gone to a new place to await rescue. When the transcript was later released, people thought it was science fiction. But the coordinates? They matched Cydonia, the region of Mars, where the face and pyramid-like structures were later photographed by Viking orbiters. Was it imagination, or was McMonigal tapping into something we don't understand? Now here's where it gets darker. Declassified notes suggest there were sessions designed not just to see targets, but to influence them. The term psychic influence operations. One account describes a viewer attempting to give a foreign leader chest pains. Another tried to disorient a terrorist handler. Officially, no one admits it worked. Unofficially, let's just say some targets never made it to trial. The ethics? Murky. The potential? Terrifying. To unlock more power, Stargate's minds turned to a civilian think tank, the Monroe Institute. Founded by Robert Monroe, the institute specialized in hemisync, audio technology that claimed to synchronize brain waves for out-of-body experiences. Soldiers were trained in deep meditation, visualization, and what Monroe called Focus 21, a state of consciousness outside time and space. Some claimed to leave their bodies. Others said they accessed parallel dimensions. The CIA called it the Gateway Experience. And in 2003, a document titled Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process was declassified. It reads less like science fiction and more like quantum mysticism wrapped in military jargon. By the late 80s, Project Stargate had fractured into smaller subprograms. One of them, Operation Sunstreak, tasked with using remote viewing to locate hostages, identify nuclear stockpiles, and monitor terrorist activity. All from a small, windowless room. Reports claim viewers successfully found downed U.S. planes, missing personnel, and secret enemy installations. One story, a viewer reportedly saw a U.S. general being held in a basement. 2 days later, Delta Force raided the location and found him exactly as described. Again, documented. They were building intelligence not with drones, but with minds. Skeptics had their doubts, so the military brought in science. At SRI, physicist Hal Puthoff tried to quantify remote viewing. The experiments were double-blind, controlled, repeatable, and the data? Surprising. Statistically, many subjects scored above chance, way above, enough to raise eyebrows at the Defense Intelligence Agency. They even used Faraday cages, electromagnetic shields, to test if signals were involved, but it didn't matter. The viewers still saw what they weren't supposed to. The conclusion: if it worked, it wasn't through traditional physics. Something else was going on. In 1975, one of America's most gifted psychic spies died under circumstances that still raise questions today. Pat Price was one of the program's most successful remote viewers. In 1975, after a series of shocking results, Price suddenly died of a heart attack while on a trip to Las Vegas. His death raised red flags. There were no prior health issues. He was in his 50s, and some believe he was targeted, either by the CIA or the KGB. Former agents later claimed Price was on the verge of defecting. Others believe he saw something he wasn't supposed to, something non-human. His notes vanished. His sessions classified for decades. But Price's work lived on in even stranger projects. Stargate's offshoot, Project Center Lane, was run by Army intelligence, and they wanted to go underground, literally. One report had a viewer explore alleged alien bases beneath the surface of New Mexico, specifically Dulce. He described vast halls, humming machines, and strange beings working with humans. It sounds like science fiction, but the details matched reports from civilian abductees, either mass hysteria or confirmation of something deeper. The tunnels, they say, go beyond just the Earth. As viewers went deeper into altered states, some began to describe non-human intelligences. They called them the Watchers. Others said they encountered energy beings, entities that communicated telepathically. The government quietly shut down several of these sessions, labeling them unreliable. But internal memos reveal something else: fear. Viewers were starting to report the same entities across different sessions, even when they didn't know each other. Were these real, or were they tapping into a universal consciousness, a collective mind beyond space and time? In 1995, Project Stargate was officially terminated. The CIA released a statement calling it inconclusive and unreliable, but insiders say otherwise. Some say the results were too real and too uncontrollable. Remote viewers began seeing classified operations. They couldn't be turned off. Others say the program didn't end. It just went black. Before Project Stargate became a household name in the world of conspiracy theories, it had another face, Operation Grill Flame, run jointly by the Army and DIA in the late 1970s. Grill Flame was the Pentagon's official attempt to weaponize psychic ability. The goal? Create a unit capable of remote viewing, locating hostages, missile silos, secret weapons, without stepping foot on foreign soil. Soldiers were selected not for combat experience, but for sensitivity. They were placed in secluded rooms, given coordinates, and asked to view distant places with their minds. In one experiment, a viewer correctly identified a Soviet biological weapons lab right down to the shape of the ventilation system. And this wasn't a one-time fluke. Accuracy like this happened again and again. Grill Flame didn't last long as a name. It was soon absorbed into other programs. But its influence? It laid the groundwork for everything that followed. Not all targets were enemy bases or hostage locations. Some viewers were quietly tasked with observing the moon. One anonymous session buried in a 1980 report described massive structures, towers, domes, and activity on the far side of the moon. The viewer reported tall beings operating machinery and observation decks that seemed to monitor Earth. Another described luminous crafts hovering above crater rims. When questioned about who sent them, the beings responded, "We are not allowed to interact with you yet." These files were shelved, not refuted, just buried. Years later, whistleblowers from NASA and the Air Force would echo similar stories. Were these psychic projections tapping into cosmic intelligence or uncovering secrets humanity isn't ready for? As the Stargate program evolved, so did its purpose. Near its end, Stargate shifted focus from intelligence gathering to metaphysical exploration. Some sessions were labeled as studies of non-local consciousness. The objective? Find out where the soul goes after death. One viewer, under controlled trance, claimed to follow a recently deceased individual through a tunnel of light into what he described as a vast information field. Another spoke of meeting energy beings who taught through vibration, saying that Earth was a school for souls to evolve. These sessions were kept out of most reports. Why? Because they crossed into theology, philosophy, and maybe truth too uncomfortable for official channels. But if the government took even this seriously enough to study, what does that say about what they really know? If the United States had psychic spies, the question became, could enemies do the same? Enter psychic counterintelligence. A sub-program within Stargate was quietly assigned to detect and defend against foreign remote viewers. The concern was that adversaries, like the Soviets, might use psychic techniques to extract classified information or influence United States personnel. Defense contractors began working with shielding protocols, including lead-lined viewing rooms, electromagnetic field scrambling, and psychological cloaking. One experiment involved a viewer trying to locate a target buried in a Faraday cage within a moving military convoy. The result? The viewer still found it. That terrified command. This pushed them toward investigating psychic firewalls using intent, symbols, and counter-visualization to mask real-world secrets, not to spy, but to defend against thought-based espionage. As the Cold War faded, a new race began, not for missiles, but for minds. By the mid-1990s, military labs, defense contractors, and corporate R&D teams were pouring funds into consciousness technologies. These included artificially induced altered states, binaural synchronization, tachyon field generators, and intent-based control interfaces. Some of these programs aimed to weaponize thought. Others, to enhance decision-making, intuition, or even communication without speech. In 2001, a patent surfaced describing a method to transmit thoughts directly into the auditory cortex using microwave pulses. It was nicknamed the Voice of God weapon. Now think about that. A battlefield where the enemy hears your commander's voice inside their own mind. This was no longer Stargate. This was something bigger. In 1995, the Defense Intelligence Agency commissioned an outside review of Stargate, led by the American Institutes for Research. The report concluded, remote viewing has not been shown to operate consistently and should not be used for operational purposes. That became the official reason for shutting it down. But here's what they didn't highlight. The report also stated that some remote viewing results were statistically significant and that select individuals had repeated success. One of the evaluators, Dr. Jessica Utz, argued the findings were scientifically valid and the real issue wasn't performance, it was politics. In other words, the program worked, but it scared the wrong people. When Stargate was terminated, many assumed that was the end. But in the years that followed, former military remote viewers began to teach civilians. People like Paul H. Smith and Lynn Buchanan opened schools and workshops. They published training manuals. Remote viewing had gone rogue. Within a decade, it spread to entrepreneurs, treasure hunters, law enforcement, and even search and rescue teams. One example, a civilian viewer located a missing hiker in Arizona within 100 yards after conventional teams failed for weeks. Police departments began quietly consulting with psychics, and once again, it worked just enough to make people uncomfortable. Here's the truth most won't admit. Project Stargate didn't die. It changed names. It went black, and it evolved. Now it lives in DARPA budgets, in declassified neural interface programs, and in the AI that studies human thought in real time. Remote viewing is now part of predictive modeling. Consciousness research is tied to quantum computing and zero-point energy labs. And deep in defense think tanks, the question isn't, can we spy with the mind? It's, can we control reality with it? The frontier isn't space, it's the mind, and the next war may be fought there. To this day, former viewers speak of active operations funded not by government, but by private contractors, tech billionaires, military insiders, even intelligence startups. They say Stargate isn't a project anymore. It's a philosophy, a way of thinking. The Monroe Institute still runs courses. People still train in remote viewing, and every year a few new cases pop up, people who claim they saw something far away that later proved true. So ask yourself, if they could see the future, the past, and the secrets of our enemies, what else did they see? You've just heard what may be the most unbelievable yet documented secret in U.S. intelligence history. Project Stargate was real. The psychics were real. And the results? Still unexplained. But one thing's for sure, the mind holds more power than we can possibly understand. If this blew your mind, imagine what's next. Like, comment, subscribe, and pass it along, because next time we ask the question, the Earth, round or flat, you decide.